everyone, it's Joanna here from Inspired by Stamping, and welcome to day 2 of our November release. And I am releasing Big Thanks stamp set. This is a great sentiment builder, and it's also our free stamp set of the month. Yay! Here are just 2 cards that I created using this beautiful sentiment builder. I've used the Lily of the Valley stamp set as well. And here is a little sneak peek of tomorrow's rose that we're releasing, and also this thank you. And that's what we're going to be focusing on, is an emboss resist technique and using watercolors as a background. I'm so excited for this technique. And I'm going to be sharing how to color this rose tomorrow in tomorrow's tutorial. So I'm just using some Canson cold press watercolor paper, and we're just going to lay down this little bit of powder here to make sure it doesn't stick when we use our embossing powder. And I'm using my Mini Misty, and clear stamps have a tendency to be extra sticky when they're brand new, so sometimes what happens is your watercolor paper will be lifted when you stamp down. So we always want to make sure that we have that pushed over in the corner, and you can see here it just kind of lifted just a little bit too much, so push it back down in the corner and make sure that that's perfect. So I'm stamping with some VersaFine here, and watercolor paper, it's always good to double stamp, so this is just perfect to have double stamping here. Now I'm pushing that aside, and I accidentally got a little bit of black ink, so I just want to get that off before it dries. Some people ask me why it is that I don't stamp together. Well, stamps have a little bit of a border around them, and when you're doing sentiment building, I find that that's just spaced too far apart for my liking, so I always just like to do single stamps here. So we're just going to push this aside, and we're going to grab our Versamark, and we're going to use some clear embossing powder next. So I'm just going to get this off, and I want to make sure that those stamp sets are extra washed. In fact, I would recommend that you go to your sink and just grab a little bit of dish soap and clean them so that you don't stain that Versamark any color. So making sure I don't have any ink left over on my stamps, and I've grabbed a scrap piece of paper here, and I'm just making sure there's nothing left on those stamps for that staining of that Versamark, and I have stained a Versamark pretty badly. So we're just going to offset this just a wee little bit. So just a little bit. You can see how it's just not too much, but that's going to be our white when we go in watercolor, and you'll see how beautiful that is. You can go to the left or you can go to the right, whichever way you want to go. And now I'm just going to place the U again, just a little bit offset. And again, I just like to single stamp. That's just my preference. You can do it any which way that you prefer. And now we're going to just push this over to the side and put our scrap piece of paper down, because I'm going to grab our butterfly stamp set here, and we just want to make sure we have a scrap piece of paper for that Versamark. So now I'm just going to get that Versamark, and I'm going to get that stamp nice and juicy, and now we're just going to stamp on both corners here. And I'm just going to stamp up here in the left-hand corner too as well. So now I'm just going to grab my embossing powder, and I'm using clear embossing powder because we're going to watercolor it, so that watercolor paper will show through beautifully, and it's just so pretty when we get some watercolor on there. So just give it a little bit of a tap, make sure we got that excess off, and now we're going to hit it with our heat gun very quickly. It doesn't take very long. Make sure that when you're going to be doing the butterflies or any form of sentiments, I really recommend that you buy fine embossing powder, and this is just perfect for those fine detailed stamps that you have, and you really need to have, you know, just those beautiful lines show up, especially with those butterflies. And so now it's almost heated here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my Mini Misty one more time, and I'm going to line it up again for the second time. Flip it over here and get that U out of the way up there in the corner. And again, pushing it straight down on the corner on the left-hand side here. So I'm just going to place it where I want it, get that U out of the way, and make sure that it's lined up perfectly. And again, hit it with that Versamark. And now you have a very straight, equal on each side, and very even, so it's really perfect. And again, just one little hit here with that little clear embossing powder, and we'll just hit it quickly again with our heat gun. And this just takes just 2 seconds just to quickly heat it. And now the fun part, now we get to watercolor. So I'm using some Winsor & Newton watercolor paints, and I'm using the turquoise here. And what we're going to do is just lay down a very light color, and that's just going to be our background, and that we're going to build up. So we want that paintbrush. I'm just using a number 5. I like to have a lot of control over my watercolor here, and this is going to be nice and wet. You can see I'm not dabbing off any which way. And we're just going to switch colors here and create just a little edge around that butterfly. We don't want it too dark here. We just want a very light edge around the butterfly. And this is because we have used that clear embossing powder, so we really want to create a definition around that edge so that you can see that butterfly in its full beauty. So now we're going to wipe off our brush again, and I'm going to go just a little bit darker. And now here comes the fun part where we get to layer. And I'm going to layer this 3 times here. And every layer will get a little bit darker, and then you'll be able to see that clear embossing starting to pop out. We want to make sure that this is nice and wet still so that we don't have hard edges between the 3 layers that we're going to produce. So it's really important to get that watercolor brush wet and just blend in between all the layers as well, as you can see that I'm doing right here. So now I'm going a little bit darker again. So this is really wet. It's a very wet consistency, and I'm working really quickly. You could grab a bigger brush if you would like, but since this is just really small, I'm just using a number 5 brush. I try to keep to the brushes that I use in all my tutorials so that you guys don't feel that you have to go run out and buy every brush that I use during my tutorials. So now again, I'm just rinsing off and using a wet watercolor brush without any color, and now we're just going to blend in again. See that edge? I want to make sure that that's nice and blended for all 3 layers here. And you can really see the darker you go, the more you're going to see that beautiful clear embossing pop through on those sentiments. As you just saw, I just picked up a little bit of a mistake that I had. So what you do is just get your brush wet, dab off, and then while your brush is dry, you can pick up the little splatters, and that will help, and it will dry. So that's how you pick up your color if you have a mistake. And I'm just blending in those corners and running it into the cardstock here, or the watercolor paper, I should say. And now I'm just going to wash my watercolor brush again, and we're going to dry it off with our little cloth. And now I'm going to pick up the paint off that clear embossing so we can really start to see that clear embossing shining through. And it's really great to use that clear embossing because it goes over the black and you won't be able to see it either. So here I am just kind of picking up all that paint and dabbing off on my green cloth underneath me, as you can see here. And so that just helps show that beautiful clear embossing starting to really pop, and you can really see that resist effect going on right now. And this is what you just do. You can also use a paper towel if you'd like, or a cloth, and just gently dab. But since this watercolor paper is wet, you really don't want to dab with a paper cloth because you will also pick up that paint. And I really like the dark effect that we have going on here. So just go along and just lightly pick it up with that number 5 brush. You can see that that works just fine here. And just lift that paint right off those sentiments. And if you see any messes or if you missed a little spot, just go over it again. So now we're going to go over our butterflies here. So I'm just creating a kind of a medium milky consistency. It's nice and dark, but not as dark as we want that darker creamy consistency to be in that middle area of our butterflies. So now I'm just going to add the darker area here towards the center. And what we'll end up doing is we'll go over the entire butterfly in just a little bit with a clean watercolor brush, and we'll blend it all in. So now I washed off my watercolor brush so I can have that lighter consistency here for that entire butterfly. And we're just going to lightly color it. And then we'll mix a little bit of that pink again, and nice and dark, and we'll add it in the center here. It'll naturally bloom, but to make it a gradual effect from light to dark, we're going to go back over again with our paintbrush. And here I am just washing off my paintbrush. And now we're going to just blend it in the whole entire butterfly here from light to dark, and it'll have this beautiful gradual. It's much similar to the distressed inks of moving that ink around as it is with watercoloring as well. And again, just going up here on that top corner and doing the same thing, making sure that we have a complete blend. We don't want any hard lines here, and that's what prevents those hard lines from those 2 different colors. And I just didn't like this corner up here, so I thought I would just blend it in a little bit more. I found a little hard edge, and if you find any hard edges, just get your watercolor brush wet and just blend it in a little bit more. And now the fun part, now we get to add the sequences and the rhinestones to here. So here I am, I'm just kind of placing them randomly, and I typically put a little bit of glue on my finger, and I just kind of dab it with my finger, and then we just add a few rhinestones randomly. And I'm just kind of seeing that I had a little bit of that paint on that beautiful butterfly on some of the wing tips. So I'm just wiping it off right now, just making sure that that shows through nice and white again. And again, if you see any mistakes, I kind of start playing around with it too and kind of looking what I see if I need to add anything else. So I'll flip it over and we're just going to add some foam dimensionals here, and I'm just placing it on a regular cardstock. So it's just 5.5 by 4 1/4, and I've already cut it perfectly. So that's all I do is just layer that on, and we'll just line it up perfectly here. And there you have it. And again, if you see anything, I see that 4 did not actually get that one cleaned up, so I wanted to go back up and retouch that. So if you have any questions or comments, don't forget to email me or leave a comment here. I would love your feedback. And don't forget to check out our online classes, and there's some big prizes to be won this week over on our blog, so make sure you stop by there too. Have a great day, guys, and thanks for stopping by.